Welcome to the MD podcast with me, Martin Hartley, the Commercial Director for Imagine. We're a professional services consultancy specialised in providing high-value, low-population SMEs to the banking and financial services sector. Being a leader within the world's leading financial organisations is aspirational. However, very few people make it to the top. The Imagine podcast will offer insightful, interesting and frank discussions on the biggest issues facing directors and divisional leaders in the financial services sector. The show aims to inspire and educate future leaders by telling the career stories of today's leaders. We can't wait for today's episode. I'm joined by Conor Murphy, Head of Portfolio Management for the Global Aviation Finance Office at MUFG. Conor, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be on the podcast. Good, thanks. I'm very good.
Good. All right. So as everyone knows, the format is the past, the present, the future. Just give us a quick overview on what you're doing now, and then we'll dive back into the future and get into it.
Sure. Thanks for the intro. So I'm responsible for our portfolio management in our global aviation business, specifically covering EMEA. And it's an interesting role in that it covers a very global mobile type asset, which is, can be traded globally, is used by airlines across the world. And financing of it is very interesting because it covers different jurisdictions and different legal frameworks, and it has a lot of very also challenging elements to it. But it is it's an interesting place to work, and it's an interesting industry to be involved in because of the complexity of the type of financings we do. So specifically around myself, I'm in charge of a portfolio team in primarily in the UK, but we cover all of EMEA, and we are basically managing all our aviation transactions from as we call it, post-closing. So after the deal has paid out to the client and after it's kind of up and running, we manage those transactions through to final maturity. And it's everything to do with monitoring, ongoing reporting, monitoring the counterparties involved, the aircraft that are involved, and just making sure the deals are performing as we would expect them to.
Sure. Challenging year, to say the least.
Challenging is an understatement. We use the word unprecedented, but I think really it is probably the only word that can be used, particularly in aviation.
I was going to say. It's a vertical you didn't really want to be in this time of year.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's a funny industry because it's cyclical. It reaches a peak, and then you could view it as a balloon or bubble, and then it will kind of, people will exit the market and it'll go down again. So there was already speculation that we were at the top of the cycle anyway back in 19, and I think 20 probably accelerated something which was going to happen inevitably, but. It's the scale of the downturn and the scale of the impact in the industry that was just like, we've literally never seen anything like it before. Yeah. The number of aircraft grounded, the number of Chapter 11s and bankruptcies, and just the scale of what happened to the industry.
Yeah. It's obviously a real shame, and one of obviously the effects of the pandemic. Okay, great. Thanks for that overview. Appreciate that. Let's go back to the very beginning then. Tell us whereabouts, where are you from? What was family like, life growing up?
So yeah, I'm from Ireland, as you can tell by the accent. I grew up north of Dublin in a county called Meath, which is a very kind of rural, agricultural, got horses and fields, and that's about it.
Beautiful.
So sports played heavily and still continues. It was a big factor in my life from an early age. I used to compete at a high level in swimming.
Okay.
Training 6 to 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Or for a number of years, which drove my parents crazy because I had to get up at like
early mornings,
6 in the morning, exactly, early mornings or late evenings. So, but on the other side, what I realized is it also gave me from an early age a real discipline and an appreciation that things don't come for free, that you need to put in the graft, and that you see people ahead of you and you realize they're ahead of you for a reason. And that's either they work harder, or they work smarter, or they found ways to kind of optimize what they're doing and learn from the best in order to be a high achiever. So I think sports in particular in my definitely teenage years gave me that insight into not just what it means to be a team player, but also what it means to take things to the next level and what you need to do that. So it it was definitely it was definitely like something that I've had a lot of interest and has influenced me a lot.
I think that's probably our first top tip for the podcast, as obviously we look to inspire and give something back to the next generation of people coming through. And I think there are a couple of points on that, right? The discipline, but then it's not only the hard work is an obvious one, but it's not only that hard work that you mentioned there, working smarter or looking up to somebody in particular and studying what they've done to ensure that you can try and emulate that. So I think that's a key. I can resonate with that as well with my background and being heavily into sports growing up is something that my son's just started swimming. Actually, he's 4, so he's got swimming this evening. So every Thursday he goes, and he said to me yesterday, I'm doing football, I'm doing play ball, I'm doing tennis, I'm doing swimming. Like, why am I doing all these sports? So he's like trying to get his head around. I was like, do you enjoy them? Yeah. Are you learning stuff in them? Yeah. Okay. Is it keeping you fit, active? Yeah. And he's like, oh yeah, actually, this is really good. So it's just about installing that discipline, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, every sport is different. Some sports are more team focused, others are more individualistic. I guess swimming would be seen as more individualistic, but at the end of the day, you're still training with a group of people, and you're all looking for the same kind of outcomes, so you can support and push each other on as well. So sports has factored so hugely in my life from my teenage years onwards, and even now, that I think in the business world, it is so helpful to take some of the lessons from the sporting world, because high achievers and people who have to face the pressure as well of competing regularly, it gives you such a good mentality and a strong mindset to be able to deal with other areas of your life.
Yeah, I agree. Why swimming then?
No particular reason other than that maybe I showed an affinity for it at an early age. I just like being in the water. I still love being in the water. And I just, maybe I had a kind of the body type for it, I was a bit lanky, long arms. And I just, it was just drew me to being in the water and to doing that. As I got older, my interest changed to football and rugby and other things. But then I came back full circle and I started doing triathlons about 5 or 6 years ago, because I realized I couldn't get away from my passion for swimming, however hard I tried. But I then wanted to combine it with other things, so cycling and running, to just try something different and compete in a different way and push myself in a different way.
Great. Okay. So then, obviously, growing up, the countryside, the farms, the fields. What was school life like growing up?
School was good. I enjoyed it. It was. I would never say I was a stellar student. There was subjects that I really enjoyed, things like history, geography, English, but things like maths, science, I found it a bit hard. I struggled with, I think, the underlying theory, and also just figuring out ways to solve things. I probably didn't have the patience at an early age to really knuckle down and do it. But then as I got older, ironically, I was considering doing either physics or economics in university. So clearly maths was figuring very heavily in that.
I was going to say.
But at an earlier age, I just couldn't get my head around it. And I realized later on that my approach to learning was wrong. But it was limiting me in certain ways in how I was learning, and that if I was just looking at getting from point A to point Z in a maths problem, that for me was really difficult, because I needed to understand the why as well. And the more I studied history and I learned more, the basics around science or maths, rather than a specific theory, but why things have been designed the way they have, it actually allowed me then to look back at how I approach problems and understand them from much different perspectives. So I mean, in general, I enjoyed school, but I would say also I struggled because I couldn't always understand the why of what I was doing.
Do you think that was because of a maturity aspect of the age that you were at then? Or do you think that you could have learned it if you understood it at that age, you just didn't know at that time?
It's probably both. Probably part of it was just my head wasn't in a place where I was able to take some of these things in. But part of it was also that I was probably searching for meaning, maybe in ways that it wasn't expressed at the time, in a way that I could relate to or understand. In the meantime as well, I've had to, adjust my way of thinking and accept that some things just, aren't going to resonate with me the way they will with somebody else. And that's okay as well. There's some things where I've got a stronger leaning, some things not. And I realize, I also have to play to my strengths. rather than trying to be an everything generalist with, and try and do as well in everything, whereas some things just aren't my,
Yeah, there's loads of bits that we can pick out there. Two things in particular for me there are, obviously you've had to adopt your approach. We'll come on to that. What I'm keen to understand, I think it could be a really important point for the listeners, is you said you studied and understood a little bit more around the history of maths and science, and then that allowed you to adopt your thinking. I mean, what did you learn that allowed you to adopt your thinking? And then how have you used your key learns, not just in school, but in work?
So I guess for a lot of these subjects, there's a given, like a dogma almost. This is the way something is done. This is the theory. This is why it is the way it is. And I found it hard just to take that at face value and apply it, because I didn't know the context, or I didn't understand the history leading up to that. So when I went back and looked at some of the history and some of the thinkers, I was then able to understand what the framework was that they were working with, what other ideas were knocking around at the time, and why these things actually became like the accepted norm, or the accepted model. And then when I understood that, I was then able to kind of see much more broadly. But at the same time, that broader view allowed me also to focus in on things and understand, if there was a key question, why it was done in a certain way. Economics is also very, very similar in that it's a lot of it's very theoretical. So you're given fundamental theories, which then explain a much larger network, or a much larger kind of economy. But to understand, to accept those kind of basic theories is one thing, but then to accept that they interact in a certain way, or that they lead to certain outcomes, for me, I find challenging at times, because to give you one kind of concrete example, in economics, even now, there's very little emphasis put on psychology, the psychological reasons why people make decisions. It's all based on optimization, based on equilibriums, based on supply and demand. And I find it fundamentally very hard then to relate to economics, because we are at times irrational human beings making decisions that don't always add up to the optimized solution.
Completely.
And I, it's things like that where I find the conventional thinking could actually be something that for me is hard to apply in real life, because it is not necessarily, in practical terms, something that actually really happens.
Yeah, the housing market is one that baffles me for that. It's the most expensive purchase they'll make, and they probably spend 10 minutes in it.
It's so true, isn't it? So true.
Walk around it twice for 10 minutes.
Yeah. A 30-year mortgage, and you look at somewhere and you don't even visit it twice, and you maybe don't even have an engineer or anybody inspect it, and you put all your money into this. It is very,
it's brilliant.
Very strange.
Okay, cool. So school was good. What happened then? Straight into higher education? Did you take a break at all, or?
No, straight into college. Because in Ireland we had what was called a transition year.
Yep.
I don't know what I was transitioning to, maybe to maturity or to enlightenment. So between
Are you there yet?
What's called our junior certificate, I guess it's like the initial exams, like the A levels.
Yeah.
To then the senior exams, there's a year in between called a transition year. And I decided to take that in my wisdom, because I thought I needed some time to figure my life and figure the world out and everything. In reality, it was really just a year where I just kind of, messed around a bit, tried different things, but it didn't. In hindsight, I would say I kind of regret doing it, but I guess you make decisions for a reason. At that point in time, it seemed good. So I didn't take a gap year, but in effect, I had a gap year before I did those final school exams, and then I went straight into university. And as I said earlier, my two main choices were either physics or economics. And the way the point system worked, I got enough for both, but my first preference was economics. So I ended up doing economics in Germany in university, which actually is there's a lot of similarity between economics and physics, at least the part I did. It's very mathematical and theoretical. So maybe that's the way my brain works. And I kind of realized it was one way or the other. So yeah, I did economics in German, and you wouldn't really think they complement each other, but I think the logic for me at the time was Germany is a very strong economy.
Yeah.
After I graduated, I'll probably look for a job abroad, because, Ireland had historically had ups and downs, particularly in the 80s. So I thought, have a language as well. German's probably a good one to choose for Europe. And, maybe I can work in finance in Germany after that.
Yeah, makes sense. Still speaking German fluently?
Yes. So ultimately, I did move to Germany in 2008 to the bank that I had been working with until 2 years ago. And I was in Frankfurt. I've been in Zurich as well, so 2 German-speaking countries. And I actually was able to develop my German a lot, to the point where I was using it in meetings, preparing emails, preparing minutes, reviewing financial statements, talking to auditors, all that kind of stuff, looking at loan documentation, everything in German.
Excellent.
So
good. So you used it. Excellent. Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Okay, so you left uni, you did a master's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I focused just on economics because I realized that that was probably going to be the more important for career development. At the time, my thinking was I want to get it more involved in economics as a science and become an economist or some type of analyst.
Yeah.
So I decided, usually you need a minimum of a master's, usually a PhD in economics to progress in that. So I had been working in the central bank for a period of time in the economic analysis department. And then I decided, I want to go further with this. So I went back and did a master's. And that was really, I have to say, my undergraduate studies was probably not as, it was a period of time where I was finding myself. I wasn't as diligent as I could have been for the first couple of years, to the point where I was failing a lot of exams and really not achieving my potential. I was getting frustrated. But then I realized when I graduated and went to the working world, that I wanted to prove something to myself. So my master's was a way to prove to me that I could achieve something.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to put all my time and effort into it. So I did focus on doing well in that, and I had a very theoretical thesis as well. And I put the time and effort into it. But then I realized afterwards that sometimes the journey is more important than the actual result. And having a good master's in economics, I realized, actually, what do I want to do with this now? And I came out having no idea what I wanted to do, because I thought I wanted to be an economist. I interviewed in the central bank, and I got onto like the last round, and then the recruiting for that year thing then closed. So I thought, okay, the window's going to be at least another year if I want to stay in Ireland and do it. So I thought, okay, I've done a master's. So what are my options? My options are, 1, I do a PhD, or 2, I go into the working world, work for a year, reapply, in whatever, March, April next year, and try and get in as an economist. And they were basically the two ways I went. And I realized PhD is probably, at this point in time, it's too late for me to start doing it this year. I'm going to have to wait anyway. Yeah. So I put that on hold, and I just realized, look, I'm just going to go into the working world and earn some money, and then see where I am, 6-12 months from now. And then after doing that, I realized that I was actually much more suited and had much more of an affinity for the practical world, for the practical business world, than the theoretical models of economics. And that was probably the first eye opener for me, that everything I'd been doing until then was building up to a certain type of career, which I realized then I didn't want to have, or maybe wasn't suited to me, or just was misaligned with my values and my interests. So then once I went into the working world, into banking, I realized I much more enjoyed the practical day-to-day life of banking, lending, talking to clients, structuring deals, dealing with default cases, all of that.
I mean, it's very, very typical, right? It's my wife's a solicitor, and a lot of her friends and peers went through the process, went to law school, even did their training contracts, and then thought, law's not for me. And you're like, you have this idea of what you want to do. You spend thousands of pounds on your education, and you think, oh, actually, I don't really enjoy this. And you've got several of them working in different areas. But like you say, it's the education, it's that ability to learn that subject, and therefore then you can apply that learning and that ability to learn to anything else, really. But it's a lot of my clients that I speak to are in exactly the same situation as you, so it's quite interesting. I mean, so then we're now to the point where fully qualified, you've gone into the working world. Tell us about, like, how did you always want to get into finance, or did you fall into it? Or obviously you mentioned that you want to be an economist, and it's where did you go from, right, okay, what do I do now, to the bank? What was that thought process?
Yeah, the thought process is really just buying time. So this is just a bridge. I'm going to do this for a year, and then I'm going to continue on with my studies, most likely. But then I guess your working life and your private life are all intertwined. So, I was in the process of I had, a partner. We were thinking about getting married. At the time, I was kind of buying time, going into the working world, get some money, save up a bit, then with the view to going back and doing a PhD. But then as I started working and as life happened, I realized that it was going to be another 2 to 3 years of my life doing a PhD, leading then into academia, down a route which maybe I wasn't particularly suited for, maybe I didn't have the passion for. So then as I started working in financial services, I realized actually, I think I'm much more suited to the practicalities of day-to-day business than the theoretical thinking of academia. And then on top of that, I was like, I just need to earn money as well, because, got plans for the future, and I want to be able to provide.
Yeah, makes sense. So talk us through your first job and what you were doing.
So the first job was I was in a call center in insurance, which was, in hindsight, it was I just jumped in quickly to have some cash. It didn't last long. I was only there for 6 months. And then I was working in the market risk department in a small bank. It was a small kind of historically an agricultural bank, which was owned by Rabobank. Yeah. So I worked in there for a year, and then I moved from market risk into the credit department, because for me, my thinking was, I want to be in the kind of the engine room of the business. I want to understand how deals are structured. I want to understand how we work with clients, how we negotiate, what drives the P&L. Mm-hmm. And my thinking was get into the credit department, because that's where you see all the business and decision making. So from there, kind of things evolved quite quickly. So I went into the credit. We had a smallish but growing kind of distress book, because it was moving into the peak of the Celtic Tiger. So a lot of real estate and commercial lending, which was starting to go a bit sour. So I was seeing a lot of that. And at the same time, I was realizing that, I had to up my skills as well then, because I'd gone in with an economics background, but clearly economics is financial in certain ways, but it's also very like theoretical and models. So I needed to get much more practical kind of banking experience. So I did some credit exams and some different diplomas and certificates in lending, so I could understand the basic kind of principles of lending and security and mortgages and all that kind of thing. And then as that was getting embedded, I was then looking at deals. I was looking at distressed deals and working on the bank's kind of lending portfolio and getting more familiar with that.
Well, this was sort of 2004, 2006 time?
Yeah, it would have been 2005, 6 to 2008. 2008 was really where the bubble was about to burst in Ireland. Yep. In 2009, it really it went down. So it was really it was the days of really aggressive lending, just getting stuff on the balance sheet. Mainly, it was all real estate.
Yeah,
and it was an interesting time, because I would, you'd have to say across the board, lending standards probably were lowered a bit in order to get the business on. But on the other side, things caught up with us then later on because of that. And we realized, in 2009, 2010, that we had a lot of extra stock in Ireland that nothing was going to happen with it. There was these ghost, housing estates and empty commercial buildings that had been bad investments.
Yeah. And it's at that point then you made a move, did you?
Yeah, so I decided in summer of 2008, myself and my wife, we had been married a couple of years, and we had a kid on the way, and we just thought, listen, Ireland is great, my family are here, my life is here, but let's get out and see the world a bit, and let's see what else is out there. And I have to say that's probably, looking back, that the turning point in my career was probably that move, because I was probably until then quite reluctant to consider moving abroad. For many reasons. I think I was probably comfortable, and there's probably a little bit of fear as well. I was scared of the unknown. Yeah. But as things fell in place in July, August 2008, it just all started to come together, and I just had this feeling, this is it, this is right, this feels good. I had an interview with my boss, my future boss. It was literally like a 10-minute chat. I went to meet him in London. We talked about the World Cup, and we talked about some sport and some football, and I came out of the interview, and I was like, I didn't know how to read it, because it wasn't the usual kind of, he didn't grill me, he didn't really probe too much. But on the other side, I felt like the fact he hadn't asked things, maybe it was a bad interview, and that, I was going away, flying home from Heathrow, just really perplexed, not knowing had I done well, or was this
the job in London?
The job was in Frankfurt. So I met him
Yeah.
in our London office because it was easiest for both of us. And then it just after that, it went really quick. You know, I talked to HR, and we arranged everything for the move. And I was in Frankfurt by September of that year, basically setting up life in a new country with a kid about 3 months away as well. And it was an intense.
Your firstborn in Germany then?
Yeah, he was born in Germany in December 2008. Yeah. So.
Was he just thinking about football at that time? Were you? Were you like, if we get him in, we have him in Frankfurt, he's definitely going to be good at penalties.
Yeah, he's going to be the next Schweinsteiger or something.
Yeah. I suppose it's a really important time in your career. You've obviously said that now, in hindsight, that give you a good trajectory. How important was the support of obviously your new wife at the time there then, and family?
Critical. I think you need to be aligned in certain things when you're making decisions. And for us, we had an alignment in terms of where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do, at least for the next couple of years. You know, nothing's set out in stone, but we were agreed we wanted to make the move. We saw that at least the housing market, because we wanted to have a home, and the housing market in Ireland was crashing. So we just said, it doesn't make sense. You know, Germany was on the table. I had my German, of course. I had already been planning that. And then we just said, look, let's do this. Let's just move abroad. Let's try something different. And you know, we both knew that's what we wanted to do. And we were happy with their son being brought up in Germany as well.
Yeah, it's quite a nice time as well, because in that, you know, that first 2 years or so, I mean, your child's not really going to notice much difference. You know, maybe obviously lack of family being around, but immediate family, what is the immediate need to a child? I've got a 4-month-old as well. Yeah. So, and obviously we've had him in COVID. He didn't even meet anybody until a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. So you kind of, you know, you're in that bubble anyway, aren't you? But as you starting a new job, having to prove yourself in a new country, it's difficult. So that support obviously is integral.
It's 100%. And I think if you have good support behind you, even if things don't quite go to plan, you still will be able to get through it. And I think that for us was key. You know, I knew my wife had my back, and we had a newborn. First few months, you don't sleep much. You're a bit stressed out, but we knew overall that we could rely on each other, and work was supportive as well. I have to say, I mean, my employer was always very supportive and very understanding of the needs of particularly international expat employees, because they had quite a few in Frankfurt. So it was good to have support in a few fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've obviously did really well and propelled through the ranks there, and within 4 years up to head of credit risk and support. Just talk us briefly through that journey.
So I came on board in Frankfurt, and I was in kind of project finance and rail team on the credit side. And it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. But our bank was a transportation-focused bank, and for me, the two big areas were aviation and shipping. They were the ones that were the drivers. And no disrespect to the area I was in, but it was third placed. So I really enjoyed it, and I used it. I viewed it as a way to understand how the bank works, the internal processes, how the business is done. But I always saw it as like a stepping stone onto one of the bigger industries, which for me were had very transferable skills, you know, global business, lots of opportunities in investment banking across the world. So I spent my time kind of learning skills. It was almost like an apprenticeship in many ways. It was an apprenticeship, learning, growing, and then when an opportunity came to go into a subsidiary which was focusing on all the industries, I jumped at it, because my thinking was always, I want to understand how we lend across the board, how we work in shipping and aviation, how these industries work, so that I can become a better banker and have a more broad understanding of the lending world and asset finance.
Which we've already established is how your brain thinks anyway, based on your schooling life. Does that make sense?
Correct, yes. I go back to first principles before I can move on.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Okay, so what was after that?
So then I moved to Zurich to, in some ways it was a small subsidiary. It was they did a very specialized type of financing, but it was into all the transportation spaces. So for me, it was really interesting. And while I was there, it just so happened that my boss who hired me, pretty much, I would say a couple of weeks after I joined, she dislocated her shoulder. So she was off work for 4 months. I basically had to step in and take up what she had been doing. So effectively take up my boss's role. Then after that, she had a complete just reevaluation of her life, and she realized she didn't want to continue in financial services. Basically, she moved. She left the company. She moved and set up a B&B in the south of France. So completely radical change.
Brilliant.
But she and my boss at the time had kind of faith and confidence in me, and they said, "Look, we think you can step into this role and take it." So it was literally purely by chance, and that I was able to progress so quickly, because otherwise in normal circumstances I would have been reporting to this lady and probably working with her for a number of years before any progress would have happened. But the fact that these things happened precipitated a very quick move up to a new level, which I was grateful for.
Did you think you were ready?
That's it. I felt very underprepared, because I was going from having roles which were focused on the financial side, on the credit side, specialized knowledge as an analyst, into managing people. Yeah. And that was the first time I had ever really had to have a team of direct reports who I had to manage. And I felt at the time completely unprepared and just completely blindsided, basically. It was like, I can manage my day-to-day business, but how do I ensure other people manage their day-to-day and make sure we hit the targets we're meant to hit?
So how many were in the team at the time?
The team was, I think, 4. So it was a small team, but the company itself was quite international. So there was all kinds of backgrounds. Greek, Swiss, German.
Team of 4, multinational, different personality types. Had you had any training whatsoever? Had you been captain of sports teams, coached, managed, taught, trained, anything?
Yeah, so I had been captain of a couple of teams in football in the past, and also in rugby, which in some ways helped me to at least appreciate what my role could involve.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between getting a group of 11 or 15, 14 guys pumped up on a Sunday morning and having to deal with different personalities, strategically planning things, working through a budget, forecasting, your growth rate for the year. It's a completely different.
As well as your day job.
As well as your day job. My day job changes as well, fundamentally, because I went from relying on myself to relying on others, which is also it can be really difficult, because if you're somebody who relies on your own kind of acumen and your own judgment, and then you have to move from that to relying on other people to do what you need to get done, but in a way that you think it needs to be done, that at times can be difficult. And going back to the sports, the sports team, you are one of many. So you contribute, but you're also reliant on others to contribute, and you can't be in their place when they're doing what they need to do. You just have to make sure that the overall result is right, and that the team performs as a team. And in the business world, I guess in many ways you have to do the same, but you then also have to step back and let them do their job, and realize that you're no longer able to impact everything in the same way you could have before when you're doing it yourself. You have to have faith and trust in others that they can do it, and help and empower them to get where you want them to go, where you expect them to be able to go.
Yeah, it's probably a good job you played team sports as well, and not just swimming. It might have.
Exactly. Exactly. Otherwise, I would have been. In at the deep end, metaphorically and physically.
That will definitely be used as one of the snippets.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What at that point there, then, did the business give you training? Did they give you support?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. They were very supportive, I have to say. I was really grateful. So I was able to attend some courses in the UK. I did some management leadership training courses. What was really helpful as well is when I was training, I was actually in sessions with other people not from financial backgrounds.
Nice.
So people from, heavy metal, or from marketing, or from completely different areas of business.
Yeah.
So it actually gave me a really good perspective, because I saw, even though we're all in very different fields, there's a lot of commonalities in what's expected as a manager or a leader. And that really helped me to bring back into my day-to-day work life things that I thought were important. And what I realized as well is that there's no one size fits all. There's certain principles that you kind of, or values that you would say, these are probably what I want to align myself with. But in every situation, there's going to be things that you may you may have to lean to a certain side. You know, if you do a personality assessment and you're this color or that color, that's good. It gives you a good view as to where you're more likely to lean towards, but it doesn't mean that you are that. You know, you can, if you need to be more assertive in certain cases, you can be assertive.
Yeah.
But you have to realize you need to raise your energy, you need to talk in a certain way, you need to, you know, look for certain feedback. So it was really, the courses I did were really helpful to
yeah.
me.
You got the whole earth, wind, water, fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Tetra mapping,
Exactly.
and so forth. So yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. You need several strings to your bow. You also raise an interesting point there about leadership and management. In your opinion, are they the same? Are they different?
No, completely different.
Go on, give me your take on that.
So I've thought about it for quite a while, because the different courses and training I've done, you know, a lot of it is they give you practical examples, but it seems at times it's more like a manager. So in this case, I do this. In this case, I do this. Whereas leadership to me is, we have a common goal or common values. Each person may get there in a different way, but it's up to me as a leader to ensure that the people have the tools to do the job to get where they need to get to. But it doesn't mean I need to be there every second of every day checking that everything's being done the way it needs to be done, which is good for me as well, because I'm quite hands off. So I don't like to micromanage them. I like to leave people to do their job, but also understand that I'm there if they need me, that there's tools and guidance available to them, and also understanding this is what needs to be done, or this is what is expected of you. How you get there is up to you, and in many cases it's different for each person, but
Yeah.
you know, this is where we need to go to.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. It's very much my style as well. It's just ensuring that the individuals have the tools, like you said, but they also have the ability and the experience.
Exactly.
And if they haven't got the ability or the experience yet, then you're giving them the tools and the training to get there, to ensure that they will succeed, right? It's about setting people and teams up to succeed, always.
100%. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can give, with the best, you know, intention in the world, if a team doesn't have the tools to learn and do the job you need them to do, or they don't have the personalities, or they're completely, you know, misaligned, then it doesn't matter if I say we need to get here. If they're not able to, it's going to lead to huge amounts of frustration, potentially resentment, and you know, it's not going to be good for me or for them.
Great. Okay, so at this point, then you move back to London.
Moved back to London, yes, into another role. This was more of a kind of global position, supporting our kind of in charge of our middle office group. We were in the middle of a restructuring whereby that would go from kind of regional coverage to global coverage to support our aviation and shipping business. And this was a point in time where I went very much from being a manager in a specific area to a manager of a much broader kind of responsibilities. But also I felt I stepped back much more from the day-to-day business. So I went from being very much a specialist to a manager specialist to kind of a generalist. And that was something that it took me quite a bit of time to kind of understand myself, that day to day I didn't have the answers to everything. I no longer could have the answers to everything, because some of these areas I didn't have the experience in, or I didn't have the level of kind of competence to be able to be like the go-to person for everything. But then what I realized on the other side is it doesn't matter, because I've got a team who's doing this job, and they just need me to be there for them. But day to day, they're the ones who would do what I had previously been doing as a specialist.
Yeah. Okay. And then you make the move at this point. So you move to, do you move straight to MUFG?
Well, it's a long and complicated story. So DVB, we had three main pillars, as I said. So aviation and shipping were the two big ones, and the shipping business had been having quite a lot of financial difficulties for a number of years, to the point where we had started making significant losses. So our parent company decided they wanted to divest of the business. So there was a number of bidders for our aviation. They sold the two platforms separately, aviation and shipping. Shipping is still kind of being worked through. But on the aviation side, they had a number of bidders, and eventually it got to MUFG being the preferred option, and they bought the aviation business from DVB in 2019, and I moved over with our aviation platform to MUFG at the end of that year in November through this acquisition. So it was a very complex time because I came into a performing, functioning operation that I liked and very much felt an affinity with. But after a couple of years of difficult financial results and changes, it went from managing what is a day-to-day normally performing business to a completely different way of operating. You know, you're strategically placing yourself to be sold. You have to make adjustments in your business model to make yourself marketable. You have to deal with people who are very frustrated. They're fearful for the future because they don't know what it means for them specifically. So it really tested me as a manager in many, many ways because there was a lot of question marks and a lot of things I couldn't answer for a long period of time because nobody really knew.
How do you deal with that? What would be your top 3 tips around that area of dealing with a scenario where there's going to be a merger or a buyout? Like you say, there's frustrations and unknown answers at this point. So like, what were you on reflection, and what did you do in the period, and on reflection, what are the key learns from that?
So I always try and be as open and transparent with the team as possible, to as far as is legally possible. I'm not going to like spread rumors or things, but I think it's really important that teams have full visibility as to what's happening, and that you're also realistic with them about what the possible outcomes are. So I don't like just painting this rosy picture and saying everything's going to be okay, we're all going to be fine. It's like, no, potentially this could be a good outcome for a certain group of people, but there's also others who may not, be able to move with this acquisition, or people who may be surplus to requirements. And you kind of have to treat people as humans and understand that they're fearful, they're going through a stage of potentially grieving. I was grieving because I was losing a lot of what I perceived to be family members, very close friends, people I'd worked with for 10 years plus. And it was a really difficult emotional time, and also the uncertainty about your future financially, looking for a new job, having to reskill, all these things. So you try and be there for people, talk to them on a one-on-one basis or in a group, whatever they want, and just kind of go through these scenarios, understand what it may mean, and then try and deal with the potential outcomes. Yeah.
So as essentially we're saying there, be honest, transparent, and do it with integrity, and
don't sugarcoat it. Don't act like it's going to be the best thing since sliced cheese for everybody, because people can see if it's insincere or unauthentic. You need to be honest, warts and all, and say, listen, this may not be good for everyone. I'm having a tough time. I'm sure many of you are, but let's at least as a group make sure that we look after each other and get through this in the best possible way.
Absolutely. And how was the transition to MUFG then?
It was interesting. It was culturally going from a German, what was an Anglo-Saxon type structure, which was very small, 600 people globally, into a huge multinational organization of 150,000 people. That alone was very, very different, because you go from being a big fish in a small pond to a medium-sized fish in a very, very big ocean. And you have to navigate a lot of different decision-making, hierarchies. You've lots of different stakeholders. You've systems, processes that are completely alien to you, and a group of people who are dropped in with you and also don't really know the lie of the land or how things work.
Yeah.
So it all takes time. I think over time it's definitely developed into something that is very good now, and a platform that people are happy with. But there's no getting away from the fact that we look to the past and we look to what we've had, and it's almost like the good old days. You did things in a certain way, and you were much, maybe you were able to travel more, or you had different types of client relationships, or people worked in a different way. You had less restrictions, in terms of whatever, internet usage or laptop usage. But you have to kind of at some point say, listen, that was that. This has got other opportunities. Okay, of course there's things that frustrate me, but there's other opportunities, and I have to see that I can move forward, positively, rather than holding on to what was, the past and is now done.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, a positive outlook on, if you can take the good in scenarios and people, then it just makes life and work a little bit easier, doesn't it?
Exactly. And probably the last couple of years have forced me to change a lot my my mentality and my way of viewing what is a job, a company, a team, what's my role, what's my position. I've had to learn a lot more patience and a lot more acceptance that I can't decide everything. I can't determine every outcome. And there's many things that actually even my manager or my manager's manager can't have any influence over. And I have to accept that and, you know, influence what I can influence. And then other things, it's in the lap of the gods.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm.
Okay. Given obviously we are still in a global pandemic, how have you had to adapt what you've been doing recently to make the changes? Obviously you're working remotely still.
Yeah. So there's probably three key areas. One is my team that transferred over with me. They all left following the acquisition for various reasons. Some were personal, some were they wanted, you know, jobs that were more in line with what they wanted to do. So that was the first big thing. I had to staff up my team again, all remotely, recruit remotely, and train them up remotely. So that was a huge challenge. Also people in different countries as well, and, you know, travel restrictions, things like that. But I think over time, the technology has allowed us to, we can't quite replicate the office environment, but we can get as close to it as is possible to meet our business needs. So that's definitely been an area where there's been some challenges. Then the business itself, it's been just huge upheaval over the last year. You know, the aviation business has been probably as affected, if not more affected, than pretty much every other industry bar tourism. You know, aircraft grounded globally, airlines flying very small skeleton fleet.
Yeah.
Cash hemorrhaging, needing to have all kinds of emergency funding and financial support. So it's fair to say from probably start of April through to early this year, it's just been phone calls and meetings every day, trying to help airlines, trying to help leasing companies, trying to find ways to either give them some kind of concessions on their you know, repayments for a period of time, or come to some kind of agreements with them around utilization of aircraft or ways to restructure things to make them a bit more flexible for a period of time. But the market itself has had to adapt as well. We've seen a lot of what's called power by the hour. So it's basically, instead of you having an agreed lease payment, basically the airline pays you whenever they can fly the aircraft. And if they can't, then they don't pay you anything. So it's a kind of it's a concession to say, look, we know this is a really hard time, and we know we need to be flexible for a period of time. So there's all kinds of adjustments like this we've had to make. It's probably, I believe it's short-term in nature, and things should bounce back in a reasonable time frame. But there's also things outside the aviation industry's control in terms of, you know, government decision and international decisions. Travel bans and restrictions, and potentially if there's the third or fourth wave, what may happen then. So we have to wait and see kind of month by month how things develop. Yeah,
I read yesterday that Ryanair were down 702 million, but we're still optimistic. So you're like, okay, all right. I suppose it just comes down to how profitable the airlines are when they return. And, you know, hopefully that'll be very soon, right?
Yeah, and how much of a cash buffer they have as well, because you see the large airlines, they have access to funding, and a lot of them had, you know, a good cash buffer there to get them through 6 to 12 months. So they're reasonably resilient. It's the ones that were already strapped for cash that just got pushed over the edge because there was no buffer for them.
Exactly, the one. Yeah. Okay. What does the future look like for you then?
What's the future look like? The future looks interesting. It looks challenging. I like to be challenged. I like to be challenged in different ways. So for me, a big passion of mine is sustainability. And I am involving myself as much as possible within MUFG in sustainable initiatives.
Good.
In aviation itself, in terms of, you know, alternative aviation fuels and new technology, and then other working groups within the organization. And I'm also joined as a board member in a charity which helps education in Hackney and areas around there in East London in terms of sustainable education and local kind of gardening, resilience, helping people to be more green in the way they live day to day, starting with children. So I'm just trying to find ways day to day that I can be impactful in what I think is important to me, noting that I may not be able to work full time in that industry, but I want to, as much as possible, bring my values into what I do day to day. So that's something I will continue to take forward into the future.
Great. And do you within your personal career, what are the aspirations next, and how do you go about that? Do you set targets? Do you set goals? Are you more relaxed now, and it's a bit more, I'll see where we get? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I think the last couple of years I've relaxed a bit, and I've realized that sometimes things happen least when you expect them. And it's probably fair to say I've been trying to force things in the past too much, certain results, and that leads to a lot of frustration. And then frustration or putting energy in using my energy in the wrong ways then ultimately impacts me, ultimately impacts my team, impacts the people around me. So I'm just trying to be a bit more relaxed and a bit more philosophical in how I approach my business life. I realize there's things I still want to achieve in the role, in terms of building our global aviation platform, and in terms of supporting others to get the business on the right footing. And that will still take some time in terms of projects we have, in terms of getting people on board. And I'm okay with that. And then the question is for the future. I think my thinking has moved away from what's my next role, or do I want to, am I waiting for this person to move on so I can get in there, to more, what are my values? What am I passionate about? How can I marry as many of those things together day to day into something which for me is fruitful and rewarding, but not necessarily everything in a work environment. Or maybe some things are work environment, some things are outside. So I'm just trying to be more open-minded in terms of how I see my career progression, and kind of not just think I'm going to move from this to the next role when my manager moves on. Because in the past, I just saw it like that. I was like, I'm here, and then when my manager moves, or if there's another opening somewhere, then I'm going to jump for that. It's more, I'm trying to build a groundwork around my values and then see where that takes me.
Yeah, I think it's really insightful, because ultimately, if you do that, you're going to be happier, which means you're going to perform better, and therefore naturally, the promotions will come anyway, right?
Hope so. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Okay, appreciate that. Right, now to some people's favorite part, the quickfire questions.
Okay.
3 pieces of advice you would give your younger self or the next generation coming through right now. Quickfire.
Number one, and this to me is something that took me a while to learn, but I think it's really key, is authenticity. So just be yourself. Don't go into a company or a role thinking you have to be this portrayal of what people think this role is or what this person is. Be yourself. Bring yourself into the role. I look at a CV, and the CV tells me somebody's skills, but it doesn't tell me who they are. When I interview them, I see immediately who they are. Yeah. And sometimes the CV and who they are, I actually don't like the CV. The CV didn't win me over, but when I meet the person wins me over, even though they don't necessarily have the best skills. And I think you and what you bring to a role is really, really important, and people shouldn't underestimate that. That is like really, a really strong selling point. I also think that people should speak up. I think there's far too much kind of silence and people just going along with things. If you're unhappy, or if you've got comments you want to make, or you think you've got things that you yourself think are really strong or important, speak up, talk to somebody, let them know that this is maybe a good idea that could take flight if the right person gets on board with you and takes it forward. Just don't be afraid to speak up. And the third thing is, don't pigeonhole yourself. So don't think that just because you're this and you're doing this, that this is you. Just because you're an analyst or you're an economist, this is you. That's you pigeonholed for life. You will grow over time. You'll probably go from a specialist role to a generalist to a leader, manager. And you need to be able to be flexible. You need to have emotional intelligence. You need to be able to deal with people day to day. You need to present ideas. You need to get buy-in. All these things become so much important as you progress. So don't just think, this is it. I'm just going to keep studying, and this will be me, and I'll just get better at it. It's one way to go, but if you want to progress, I think also you need to be able to stretch yourself and understand the emotional intelligence and interaction with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that presentation of ideas is key. I say to anyone that everybody should be able to sell. Doesn't matter what job you do, because you need to
100%.
sell your ideas or your vision or something.
Exactly.
People on that journey.
My son does drama, and I honestly think every child should do drama at an early age. To be able to talk clearly, to be able to get your energy up, to get a message across, to speak with impact. And you see so often people come in and it's like they're maybe a bit quiet or meek or shy. It's okay. That's your natural inclination, but you can do things. There's tools. There's ways to move it so you're more impactful.
Couldn't agree more. And any books you've read recently, or any books that you would recommend? or
Yeah.
podcasts?
I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, but I realized that I don't retain information very well when I listen. I retain it much better when I read. So I'll give you a list of a few books that I've read recently that have had a big impact on me. They're all mainly in the kind of business field or kind of psychology. The one which I really liked was Bad Blood,
Yeah.
which is it's by a French American journalist, and it was basically this startup in Silicon Valley that was supposed to develop this new technology for doing blood tests, but it turned out to be a complete fraud, and the lady was a megalomaniac, and it was a textbook in so many wrong ways to run a company, but it was really insightful and brilliantly written. So I'd recommend that to anybody. A second one, which is very old, but I think very timely, is Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. I think there's so much wisdom in that, and it's so appropriate for this point in time. Things like, live your life and live every day as like a tight compartment of just that day. Don't think about the future or the past. Don't start, getting stressed out. Just do what you can do every day, and find ways just to deal with life as it happens. So that's a really good one. And then a third one, which is a bit more going back to probably my analytical thinking, is Algorithms to Live By, which is basically a mathematician who finds ways to apply kind of mathematical rules to how we live our life day to day. Anything from email management to prioritization to, I don't know, optimal meeting size, things like that. It's a little bit geeky at times, but I find it really, really good to kind of just go, oh, actually, there's scientific evidence why this works better than this.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that will really enjoy that book. That's a good shout. Brilliant. Lastly, then, who's your role model and why?
That's a really, really tough one. My favorite, so I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a number of years now, and that to me is an area, it's a sport that's really forced me to reevaluate myself mentally and physically as well. And there's quite a few kind of people in that field who I admire and respect quite a bit, including my coaches. I'd rather not give like any particular names because I don't want to do a disservice to anybody, but I would say, rather than like my role model, I think if anybody has the opportunity, I would give Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a chance, particularly for men, because I think it's so good. It just hammers down your ego every day. It forces you to reassess who you are, what you are, to reassess what your body's capable of and how you relate to other human beings. And I think it's really insightful.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, Conor, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me and sharing your insights. I've really enjoyed today. It was far more about your journey and the psychological aspects of managing people and the key learns than actually about what you do. And I thought that was great. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for the invite.
If anyone's listening and wants to pick your brains, I'm obviously sure they can find you on LinkedIn and drop you a message. But thank you and good luck for the future. And to the listeners, thanks for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Obviously, please share the podcast and get more people involved. And if you'd like to be a guest, then do reach out. Thanks and goodbye.